Clemson falls 31-24 in overtime to Florida State. They're now 0-2 in the ACC, and obviously this season has not gone as expected or as hoped. The Tigers are probably out of the ACC hunt. A lot of the goals are already out of reach, right? Season's not a total wash, still a lot to play for. And we'll talk about this game, but I want to spend a little bit more time or a lot more time talking big picture and what it means, not just for the season, but what has to change, right? If you've read my TigerNet articles, you probably have some idea. I want to add a little bit more of a holistic picture. I feel like some people think I'm saying it's all because of the transfer portal, and I want to add a lot more context to that. But first, let's start. First of all, thank you for if you're reading this article or watching this on TigerNet under an article. Thanks. Every video isn't going on a TigerNet article, so be sure to subscribe on YouTube so you don't miss other videos. All right, so first, let's talk about the Florida State game in particular. Yeah, it's another one of these things where there's like 10 different plays that are ridiculous plays that shouldn't happen the way they did, or decisions, or just strange things. And if they go the other way, Clemson wins. I mean, the most obvious, well, there's a lot of obvious ones. Early on, Jalen Phillips, who actually played a really good game, but got hit in the chest, just square in the chest with the football. It drops it. You make that interception, I think Clemson wins. Phil Maffa, in our season preview, we talked about how they just need to get just a hair faster. Phil Maffa's been awesome. If he's just a hair faster, maybe that long run is a touchdown run. Instead, it's not. Right after that, he doesn't pick up a block, or there's a miscommunication. He doesn't try to block the guy. Lights up Kate Klubnik, who probably should have seen him coming and secured the ball. Scoop and score fumble, right? That doesn't happen. They win the game. Obviously there's the decision at the end of regulation to play for a field goal. Dabo says they weren't playing for a field goal, but whatever it was, the play calling was crazy conservative. Didn't take shots there. And then, of course, missed the field goal, which, again, if you make the field goal, that's another way you win that game. You don't get so conservative at the end of the first half on defense. You go after the quarterback. Maybe they don't score there and you win the game. Right? The third down in overtime, you run the ball. Maybe you force a second overtime, or maybe you go for two at the end of the first overtime and you win it there. Maybe it's just Antonio Williams isn't hurt, right? Maybe you win there. Or if Wiggins doesn't get hurt, maybe you win. So there's so many different things. But the thing to me is, like, we have this situation where we're like, if this and this didn't happen, all these crazy situations. We just did it with Duke. If you don't fumble here, if you don't fumble there, if you don't miss these two kicks, if all these crazy events, but the crazy events keep happening. Even going back last year to the Orange Bowl, even when they had a BT part, if we don't miss those kicks, if we don't stall in the red zone here, right? You can't keep making the same excuse. They've lost 4 out of 5 to Power 5 opponents, going all the way back to South Carolina, another game that you feel like they outplayed them. They should have won, but they outplay these teams and should have won 4 out of the last 5 times, right? So I don't think that holds any water anymore, right? They're not 4 flukes. 4 out of 5 games are fluke losses, right? That doesn't make any sense. So I think there is something broader that has to change that. And I don't think it's just the transfer portal. I think it's a couple of things. Before I jump into that, I do want to give some kudos to some guys who are awesome. I mentioned Phil Maffa. He had a 77.6 PFF grade. He's great. He's a really good running back. I really hope he returns next season. He is legit. He's becoming a good pass catcher as well. I thought Garrett Riley called an outstanding game. Clemson has, a pretty big weakness at wide receiver, and he really called around that weakness to get the ball to Brenningstool, to Shipley, to Maffa in really creative ways. Yes, the end of regulation was bad, and I don't know if that's him or Dabo getting with some of those play calls, and the third down call in overtime was bad. But overall, if he's not there, I don't know that Clemson's, I don't think we're talking about if this happens or this happens, Clemson should have won. I think it might not even be close. I think Garrett Riley was awesome. Tyler Brown is the one receiver I do want to call out. He was great at 73.7 PFF grade. He's a 3-star freshman. He's with Antonio Williams out, he's the best receiver. Shipley was solid. I loved the touchdown to him on the little angle route. He comes out running kind of the opposite of a slant. He's running kind of this way, and then he cuts it like a slants and angle route, catches it for a touchdown. Great pass, great route, and great catch by him. Xavier Thomas, I thought it was solid. Nate Wiggins, before he got hurt, was great. I mentioned that Jalen Phillips dropped the interception. Besides that, he was awesome. He still, even with a bad drop, still had a 74.1 PFF grade, which is really solid. Basically anything in the 70s is good, 80s is outstanding, 60s is kind of bad, and 50s is like real bad. It's sort of how you can think about PFF grade. Cade Klubnik, aside from like 2-3 plays, was really good. Obviously, the fumble was a bad one, and the decision to pass it on the third and about a foot in overtime was pretty bad. But overall, I thought you could see the potential for him to be really great. He just needs more experience. It's a shame they weren't able to get him more snaps last year. Maybe things would be different this year if they had, but I thought he was really good. And I think he got unfair criticism prior to this game, and I just don't think he's the issue. I actually think Clemson did hit on a quarterback. They just need to get the pieces around him. So let's talk about some of the broader philosophical things. And we'll get to the portal, but I don't want folks thinking that I believe it's just go grab someone from the portal and problem solved. Yes, there's plenty of this when the margins are this close. Yeah, if you had gotten a certain player, then yeah, you probably win this one game, right? But it's not just that. I think if you remember back in 2014, Clemson started Cole Stout against Florida State instead of Deshaun Watson. And, that was kind of the difference in that game, and Clemson lost, right? And for a while there, it seemed like it really became a meritocracy after that, especially when Trevor Lawrence replaced Kelly Bryant in 2018, right? Doesn't matter if you're a senior, best player's going to play. You see that a little bit with Tyler Brown, although now it's who else are they going to play? They don't really have any other choice. But just one example, I'm not trying to call people out, but one example is Justin Masco's getting a ton of snaps. He had a 59.9 PFF grade. It's pretty bad. I mean, they came into the season planning to start him because he's a sixth-year guy, but they didn't have any track record of him doing well. And now in both of the ACC games, he's really struggled. And you just have to wonder, like, why were they betting on him having the Kevin Dodd, KJ Henry breakout? What were they seeing? Because now we're seeing the same thing we saw for 5 years. And it's not a shot at him, right? It's not his, it's his responsibility to do the best he can. It's his coach's responsibility to get the most out of them, get the most out of all their players, and assess them accurately, right? So if they're not assessing accurately, that's not on him. He's a good kid, not breaking any rules, right? He's just doing his best. But the coaches need to have a realistic assessment of players. And he's one example. He is not the only one. There are plenty of others where it seems like in the offseason, Coach Sweeney and others are really high on a guy, and then the season starts, and he looks about the same as last year, and it's not anything special. Another thing is just roster management. Whether it's saving scholarships for transfers or saving them for a kicker, this is not the first time Clemson has kind of used their scholarships on special teams in ways that, let's just say, didn't work out, right? So Robert Gunn is already on scholarship. It would be wrong. You certainly can't pull it now. He wasn't a walk-on, right? So he is properly on scholarship for 4 years if he wants to be, right? Even if he's not the starter. But we had this before when they gave a scholarship to Alex Spence, and then he didn't become a starter, and you just eat the scholarship for, in his case, it was 5 years. But Liam Boyd left, right, because he didn't have one, right? Because they didn't know, and they were giving it to guys, other walk-ons ahead of him. So he leaves. Well, you really needed him, right? So maybe for kickers and specialists, you think about just kind of having tryouts and awarding the winner who is proven, right? Because I just don't. It's very volatile to be burning a scholarship for 4 or 5 years on a kicker if they don't work out. Are you going to have 2 kickers on scholarship or 2 punters, whatever it may be? So that's just sort of like roster management. Who are you starting, who are you giving scholarships to, kind of things that maybe need to change. And then to get back a little bit to having realistic assessments of your current players, right? So they were really high on Bo Collins and Adam Randall coming into the year. And Randall's only a sophomore. He was hurt last year. So you thought, maybe they're seeing something that he's a totally different player this year. And Bo was hurt and played injured at times in the previous 2 years. So maybe they're seeing something. But they look like the same players that we all saw. So it's very weird. And why were they so confident things were going to be different? Joe Ngata wasn't flashy. He didn't necessarily meet the expectations, didn't develop as expected, and certainly not the way the dad would talk him up, saying he's going to be the best receiver that's ever come through Clemson. Right. He obviously fell short of that. He was solid. He had a high PFF grades. He was the highest rated PFF. He had the highest PFF grade on the season last year, even more than Antonio Williams because he was such a good blocker. right? So you lose him, you just kind of promote from within for Bo and Adam Randall to get more snaps. Here's how they've performed. Just again, being completely objective, using just the PFF, not my personal ratings. In the 4 games, Bo Collins has a 49 point. I won't do the decimal. 49, 81, 53, and then against Florida State a 63. So one really good game against Charleston Southern, the others bad to kind of mediocre. Adam Randall, his are worse, 48, 55, 66, and a 56 against Florida State. All right. So this is a pretty big weakness that I think a lot of people saw coming in. We wrote about it. A lot of people talked about it. This is one instance where you could have gone to the portal. Keon Coleman's obviously, it's by far the most obvious example because your rival just got him and beat you with him, right? So if you have Coleman and they don't, you probably win the game. But it's not just Coleman. There's Jamari Thrash. There's Nate McCollum, who went from Georgia Tech to UNC. There's Allie Jennings, who went from Old Dominion to Virginia Tech. We had a whole article about it. There's plenty of options, right? And Clemson bet on player development, which leads us to another, maybe the biggest, maybe bigger than the portal. And it's a little harder to talk about, so we don't talk about it as much. But, let's talk about it, is the lack of player development. We talked about Joe Ngata. He got decent, but he never reached his potential, at least not the star rating potential. Bo Collins was very highly rated. I mean, coming out of high school, he was higher rated than Keon Coleman. And he's not a terrible player. He's, an okay 2 or 3 option, but he, in year 3 now, when a lot of these guys like T. Higgins are going to the NFL draft, or at the end of the year, he's not going to the NFL draft after this year unless things dramatically change, right? So he's not developing. Joe Ngata, even someone who is awesome, like Tyler Davis, as a freshman, he had a 79.6 PFF grade. And then this year it's 78.9, right? So it's not like he's getting way better. Cade Denhoff was a huge recruit. He's buried in the depth chart. He gets some snaps, but he's not really trusted as a defensive end. He's not making huge waves, so he hasn't developed, right? He's in year 3. Miles Murphy, I think, is one of the best examples. Really, you can look at defensive end, some of the best examples. We talked about wide receiver, but Denhoff hasn't developed. Zaire Patterson hasn't developed into anything that's contributing in a major way. Miles Murphy came in, was a rock star, 85.2. That's a really good PFF grade. He did that as a freshman. Then it went down to 79.1 and then stayed about the same at 79.0. So he didn't get any better for Clemson, and then he was a first-round draft pick, right? So Clemson not getting the most out of him and not, really seeing true production increases. Say the same about Brian Brzee, although he had some extenuating circumstances with injury and family tragedy, obviously, and he's defensive tackle. But Joe Maskell, another example, he was a pretty big prospect. Through 6 years, he's gotten a little better, but, not developing like some of these guys were in the years from maybe 2014-ish to 2018-ish, right? And so that leads us to the coaching staff, right? So yes, the players, maybe it is scouting, which of course is a coaching issue. Maybe they just, you're recruiting well, but other teams are recruiting almost as well, and they're supplementing with a portal where it's de-risked because you've already seen them do well, right? So all that's true, but sort of just the process of getting some of these coaches, Garrett Riley being the huge exception, and I think it's been working great. I don't think the offensive struggles, to the extent they are struggling, are on him. I'm really impressed with him. Some of these other guys, I'm going to call out CJ Spiller because I think he's an example of one where you take a bad process and sometimes it works out. I think it's worked out really well with Spiller. I think he's really an outstanding running backs coach and has hit big on 2 running backs in the 24 and 25 cycles. Gideon Davidson being the most recent recruit. So I'll use him as an example because I am in no way, absolutely not calling for any heads here, and especially not CJ Spiller. But he was a high school track coach. He spent a year as a grad assistant, and then he was an on-field official assistant, one of the 10 assistants you get. He was promoted in 2021 after 1 year in college football as a grad assistant, right? Really, really quick, no experience from other universities, right? You'd rather see a guy, get some experience at another school. You think Mike Reed was at NC State. Clemson hired him away. He's awesome. That's more of a traditional process that tends to bode well, right? Garrett Riley did really well at SMU and TCU, comes to Clemson, right? That's a more normal process, but what Clemson's doing is different. So Mickey Kahn, friend of Dabo's, got him out of the high school ranks, had him as an analyst for a while, promotes him. Thomas Austin, he did spend a little time at Georgia State, but not much. Kyle Richardson, he was from, I'm sorry if I said Yeah. So Kyle Richardson from Northwest High School. I don't know if I said that about Mickey Khan, but Richardson was an analyst after coming over from the high school ranks. Tyler Grisham, an example here, he was a player for Dabo, and then he was a grad assistant and analyst for 6 years, and then gets promoted. Lemansky Hall was a teammate of Dabo's. He was at Ensworth High School in Tennessee. He was there for a while, and then he spent 3 years as an analyst at Clemson, and then he gets promoted to the defensive end position coach, right? So they're not hiring seasoned assistants. They're trying to season the assistants, develop the assistants as the assistants are developing the players, right? And it's not working, right? So I'm not calling for heads. I'm just calling for there are broader problems. It's not just bad luck 4 out of 5 times, right? Clemson's not just the most unlucky school, unlucky team there is, right? These aren't bad luck losses every time. Got to develop players better. Got to bring in players where you see holes. You have to have a realistic, humble assessment of what you got. And if you have to bring in players from the portal to do it, maybe it's just 1 or 2 guys. Next year, it's probably going to be a defensive end. You probably have to have it with your 2 starters leaving 2 years in a row. So it's not to say we have to use the portal for 10 guys, but you probably have to do it for 1. It's not to say we have to fire all the assistant coaches. It's to say we probably have to have a little bit more traditional approach to hiring them, not hiring friends, not hiring inexperienced guys, but hiring the best of the best. And you know that Clemson can do it because they did it with Garrett Riley. They went out there, said, we got a big brand, we got the money, let's get the best of the best. That's what Clemson needs to get back to. They got to get serious about winning. They're going to have to make some changes. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Wanted to just set the record straight. I'm not saying Clemson lost because of the portal, but it's such a fine line winning and losing these games, especially the close ones, especially in overtime. Yeah, you add a great wide receiver like Nate McCullum, like Keon Coleman, like Allie Jennings. Yeah, you probably do win the game. So you could say it is because of the portal, right? Or maybe if you had developed your defensive ends better or your wide receivers better. A lot of different things. So it's a bigger picture than just the portal, but it is a lot of things that have to change. And that's what we're going to be hoping to see this offseason. Until then, obviously, let's win the Palmetto Bowl. You don't want to collapse during the year and lose any of the recruiting class we've already got. Got some good ones coming in. So let's hold steady, get to 8-9 wins, maybe 10 if you're lucky and you win your bowl game. And then let's see what happens in the offseason. So anyway, thanks for watching. If you are a reader on TigerNet, thank you so much for reading there. Please subscribe here so you can catch these on YouTube when they're not in a TigerNet article. Thank you, and go Tigers.